one of the most useful and powerful techniques or tools that you can do to help yourself get things done is actually a tool that is not talked about very often. And this is probably one of the most versatile and useful things that we'll talk about in this course.
Cool.
It's a concept called counterfactual simulation.
Yeah.
Okay, fancy term for something that's very simple, and it's related to mental simulation, which we've already talked about. And so our minds have the ability to simulate the potential consequences of our actions, right? A counterfactual simulation is a mental simulation with a twist. Okay, so you're using that faculty, you're doing that consciously, and you ask yourself a question, which is a form of self-elicitation. You're asking yourself a what would happen if question, or what would it look like if question. And by doing that, you can help your mind simulate what you would do, what it would look like if that were true.
Well, and what it would take to make that true, which is really the cool part about it.
And the really super cool part is that the what would happen if can be completely arbitrary. You can make that question anything you want. You know, as I said earlier, what would happen if we found ourselves on the moon tomorrow?
Right.
Well, that's kind of arbitrary. That's probably not likely to happen, but we could imagine what would happen if it were.
Yeah.
And so you can ask yourself any question that you want. And, you know, that's where the flexibility and the power of this particular technique comes, because you can ask yourself all sorts of crazy questions and simulate out what would happen.
Even if it seems as crazy as, what if we were on the moon tomorrow? Sometimes, like, what if I owned my own business in 3 months and I wasn't working at this job? Feels about as crazy as, what if I were on the moon tomorrow? But by doing that, you actually fill in all the blanks to get yourself there. It's like the coolest thing.
Yeah.
It sounds so simple, but it's really cool.
Great example of right before I left P&G.
Oh, yeah.
I always figured that, you know, I wanted to do the personal MBA as my full-time job for quite a while.
It was a great side project for a long time.
Yeah. It's like, oh, it would be really cool to spend, you know, most of my day doing this instead of working a day job and doing it on the side. But I always, you know, just like, and this is a nice warning signal for all of these projects. Like, maybe a year or two from now. And then a year or two goes by. And then maybe a year or two from now. And, you know, I had kind of found myself in that loop with the personal MBA. And so I was actually on a business trip. I was sitting on a plane, so I had some time. And I started doing a counterfactual. This was probably late September. Something like that, late September.
Yeah.
And I did a counterfactual, completely arbitrary. I said, what if I were able to leave my job and do the personal MBA full-time by my birthday, which is the first week in November. And I figured, you know, I'll just do it and, you know, run a couple simulations. And, you know, you start asking yourself the questions, okay, and you're basically assuming that the question is true. Like, this is going to happen. What would it look like? And so I started to do, you know, I had my notebook with me, so I'd write down all these things of what would have to be true in order for that to be a reality. And I'm going through, and I spend probably, you know, half an hour to an hour on it. And I realized that I could totally do this. And
now.
Not only would it be like a year from now, it would be like now. I could go now. And I did a couple more simulations, and it's like, holy cow, this is possible. And so I got home from the business trip. I talked with Kels.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I was traveling over a weekend when I had a meeting with my manager on Monday morning, and I handed in my resignation. And the week before, if you would have asked me that I was going to be resigning from my job the next week, it would have been, no, never. I'm not ready for that yet. But by doing the simulation, I actually, you know, instead of assuming that it was out of reach, I just needed some time.
Right.
I actually figured out what would have to happen in order for that to be true.
And that we could totally do that in 2 months.
Yeah. And so we did. And it worked out great. So, you know, that's the beautiful thing about a counterfactual is you can ask yourself any type of what if question that you want. And you're just relying on your brain's ability to project or simulate what something will look like based
And
on
it
what
will.
you've seen.
It will
and
fill in the blanks. It is cool.
It's really neat. And so, it's powerful, it's versatile. You can do this for pretty much anything. But time spent in counterfactual simulation, in my experience, is almost never wasted. You'll never come out with it, well, that was a complete and utter abject failure, waste of time. You'll always come away with a greater understanding of what it takes to do something or what would need to be true in order to make something work. And in terms of planning or, looking at a goal or looking at doing something, you could do, a good thing. Lots of people want to travel. What would it look like if you were able to travel around the world starting a month from now? What would that look like? And the more, you take that question seriously and assume it's true, you're going to do it.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of figuring out how. You can start to fill in some of the blanks. And when the blanks start to fill in, this is a little bit related to threat lockdown.
Right.
Where
right.
if something is kind of fuzzy, cloudy, negativity bias means that we assume that it's risky. And so we don't do it. But by using counterfactual simulation, you actually start to fill in the fuzziness, and then things start to look a lot more approachable than they otherwise would. So one of the best things you can do for yourself, you should be getting a notebook for yourself anyway, for externalization and self-elicitation. Ask yourself counterfactual questions. What would happen if? Or what would it look like if? And
X were true.
Yeah, fill in the blank. And fill in the blank with anything that you're interested in doing, or anything that you've dreamed of, or anything that you've wanted to do, but you're not quite sure how or if you could pull it off. And do the counterfactual simulation, and you will be absolutely astounded at how less difficult or how easy it is to do some of these things that you assumed were just pipe dreams. That's counterfactual simulation.